Picture this, you just made the Mona Lisa, but then somebody says, remake this, but in half the time. Even if you tried, it would probably come out as a terrible version of your old work that everyone would hate. The chips are stacked against anybody truly loving these movies. But what if I told you they were stacked against Peter Jackson before the cameras even rolled? This is The Hobbit. A trilogy of films following up one of the greatest, most successful film trilogies ever made. Yet, despite the constant criticism and Peter Jackson slander, I believe The Hobbits are a miracle. And here are 3 reasons why. And I think the third one really clears it up, though. I might be one of 3 people in the entire world that actually likes these movies. I know, it's not very popular to like them, but I think they're kind of fun. Especially when orcs explode in the inexplicable rated R cut. It's only when compared to the truly marvelous and masterful Lord of the Rings when they really fall apart. You simply can't compete with a lightning-in-the-bottle feel that those 3 movies have. The perfect director directing the perfect cast at the perfect time. This is all to say, I understand the comparisons these 2 trilogies draw, but it's probably a bit unfair. They are so dramatically different in tone, presentation, and most interestingly, money. So we'll try to look at The Hobbit as independently as possible. Speaking of money, let's talk about our first point. The everyday losses. This happens all the time to me. I'll get my paycheck and just after a couple of days, it's suddenly all gone. How did I spend all of that money? Where did it go? This is the same thing that applies to The Hobbit's $200 million budget. If you combine the budgets of all 3 Lord of the Rings films plus advertising, you get roughly $600 million. They grossed over $3 billion, meaning they roughly made $2.4 billion. Amazingly profitable for a series of films in New Zealand that were made for relatively little. Of course, New Line Cinema wanted more, so we have The Hobbit. How can these movies cost double what Lord of the Rings costs and look half as good? Much like the paycheck we get, where does it all go? This is a challenging question to answer. Naturally, there's bigger name actors here, so they cost more. Luke Evans, Martin Freeman, Benedict Cumberbatch, and Evangeline Lilly, who has never looked so good, all add to the cast list. But the actors that do come back from Lord of the Rings are even bigger names now, demanding more money. Orlando Bloom, in particular, came straight from acting school into Lord of the Rings.
On Lord of the Rings, you probably didn't even get to participate in the because they signed you when you were nobody.
I got nothing. 175 grand.
But whatever he made here, I'm sure, was a real sexy amount. However, actors alone don't take up the majority of a film budget, unless you work on a dumb boner comedy, so where does the rest go? It could be the elaborate sets, shooting on location with a huge crew, or the baffling use of 3D high frame rate cameras that have aged horribly. But I tend to think a lot of this $200 million actually went to one place. This brings me to point number 2, the Prequel Curse. Most people hate prequels, and for good reason. You can't just tell a pointless backstory or try to catch lightning in a bottle again. That often comes off dumb and bad. It's like trying to make the perfect bowl of cereal twice. You just can't do it. Does that make any sense? For anyone who has seen these movies, what is the first thing you notice? For me, it's the extensive and completely mind-boggling use of CG elements. Yes, Weta is very good at what they do, but even too much water can hurt you. From literally the first sequence, it becomes more and more clear PJ leaned heavily on digital assets. The reason for which we can get into soon, but the bottom line is these are far, far from cheap. In fact, they were nearly 1,900 visual effects shots, a substantial increase from the 480 in the Fellowship of the Ring. I know, none of this has been a miracle so far, but trust me, I'm getting there. Just give me a damn minute. The reason I call this point the prequel curse is not just because the prequel trend in Hollywood tends to lean into VFX over practical, look at the nearly 2,000 VFX shots in Star Wars if you need more evidence, but also because these movies are coming 10 years after Lord of the Rings. So any character you bring back, and there are more than a few, are going to be 10 years older when they should be roughly 60 years younger. That's something you simply can't fake, and while it isn't the worst part of the film, like the now horribly dated VFX, they stick out like a sore thumb. But of course, we all know this, which begs the question, why did Peter do this? Bringing us to point 3, going in blind. Now, I'm sure you think I hate these movies at this point. Overused CG, wasted money, and wasted potential are bad. Yeah, the chips are stacked against anybody truly loving these movies. But what if I told you they were stacked against Peter Jackson before the cameras even rolled? This is where our miracle comes into play. You know that feeling you get when you go into a game or a movie without knowing anything about it? There's a bit of confusion, but excitement for what lies ahead. Twists are more twisty, and the story beats hit harder. Now imagine this, but you're the one making the movie or game. That's basically what happened on The Hobbit.
Guillermo working up designs, working up concepts.
And then because Guillermo del Toro had to leave and I sort of jumped in and took over, we didn't wind the clock back a year and a half and give me a year and a half prep to design the movie I was going to make, which was different to what he was doing.
Leaving the project hanging, but still set to film in 6 weeks. If you've ever seen one of his films, you already know how weird, off-kilter, and abstract they can be. Compare that to the rather straightforward but incredibly energetic and grounded Peter Jackson, and it's night and day difference. These two are so different, there's zero chance one could make a movie like the other, and they shouldn't. He was essentially told to take his designer yacht and do it again, but with the blueprint of a completely different designer with different materials. Meaning, Pete had to completely change the year-and-a-half direction The Hobbit was already heading in. Changing the course of a ship this size not only takes an incredible amount of time and energy, but it's a very slow process. And yet, the studio gave Peter just 6 weeks to rewrite the entire script and attempt to prep a movie that was right around the corner. Without this precious prep time, it's virtually impossible to get a ship this big floating at all.
You're winging it. You've got nothing to go on, no storyboards, no previs. You've got these massively complicated scenes and you're just making it up there and then on the spot.
No script, no planning, just whatever he could think of. Green screen was really his only friend in this case. The fact that all this happened and the movies are actually watchable and, dare I say, occasionally fun is a modern miracle. Martin Freeman specifically carries these movies. Plus, you usually understand what's happening, the action is fast-paced, the score remains great, and it's full of fun performances.
I'm surrounded by dwarves. What are they doing here?
They're quite a merry gathering. What you get used to.
Skyscrapers don't just go up, boats don't just float, and trains don't just go on their own. It takes a lot of people working hard to get them off the ground. Movies are the same. Hundreds, if not thousands of people work on them, designing costumes, makeup, hairstyling, visual effects, props, camera work, lighting, acting, editing, etc., etc. So how is Peter Jackson supposed to lead this giant ship of people without truly knowing what he's making? How can you create a world, or even a scene, without knowing what any of it looks like first?
I was able to wing it right up until the point that I had to start shooting this very intricate battle. I couldn't wing that, really. I did need to know what the hell I was doing and have a plan.
That doesn't make them great, but I give Peter Jackson massive credit for making these work at all, with how little control he had over how things shaped out. With everything stacked against Peter on the Hobbit movies, it's no wonder he doesn't make movies anymore. It seemed like a complete nightmare. But I sure hope he does, because I don't want these to be his last movies, even if I think that he pulled off something pretty special with everything stacked against him.